Hey guys, Nomus RC, just another day in the Heli world. So, going to equip this 700 competition with a Spirit Flybarless and servos. These are actually JX. I'll be running them high voltage at 8.4 volts, which will give them 32 kilograms of torque and 0.07 speed. And every bit of this is aluminum, even the bottom piece. So the JX EcoBoost, the bottom piece is actually plastic. So these will be good helicopter servos, and I'll use the same one for the tail as well because they're plenty fast. So I like to hook up my Spirit devices just like this before I actually install it onto the helicopter to make sure that everything works, right? So first thing that you would do is come into your radio and go to select model. And then I just copied one of my most recent ones, which was, I forgot you can actually scroll now. I just went to my Goblin 700, and then I said duplicate model, right? And then I told it to duplicate, and then I came down here, and I just renamed it and put a different picture, right? That's literally all that I've done so far. Change the name to 700 comp, put a different picture, and then we can actually come down here to the bind section, which is already going to be set up for DSM, whatever this X2F is, I don't even know, 22 millisecond, 8 AETR is our setup. Channel 1 through 8, because we do actually use auto leveling and recovery and bailout features. If you need to have it on the spring switch for a panic, right? So, and one of the extra channels is also for the gyro, for the tail gyro. So anyway, the reason that I'm actually making this video is because almost every time that I go to do one of these, I forget what the process exactly was, right? So I'll be able to refer back to this as well. Or if you guys do need help setting up a profile on the radio, I do have videos of that. I don't know how detailed that they are. I'm not going to go through the model setup in this video. But also, if you just contact me, I would email you a model from this radio. So that's not a problem. Just hit me up. And then that way you can have everything set for a Spirit device, and then just go in and bind, right? So something that we do, something that I like to do, is run a BEC. Okay. And then I just plug in a 3S LiPo into a BEC, and then you can run your BEC into any of the auxiliary ports. Flip this around for you guys. Into any of the auxiliary ports, 1 or 2, because that's actually where your ESC will go. And then go ahead and plug both of your satellites in and have them sitting there. So when you set up this device for the very first time, you will just plug in power and the USB cable to your computer that came with your Spirit Flybarless device. As you can notice, the dark brown wire, which is negative, actually goes to the very bottom of the device. Just so you know, all of these, the negative is towards the bottom. Alright, let's go ahead and plug it in. As soon as we plug it in, we'll actually see the Spirit initialize. Boom, now it's fully on. Now I have already bound these just to make sure that they'll bind for this video, but we're going to go ahead and redo it. So, you have everything turned on, right? You got your USB plugged in. Alright, so we go ahead and open up our Spirit software. It will actually say, if your Spirit device is brand new, it'll actually say, we've detected your Spirit Flybarless controller. It's never been initialized before. And then it'll have you set up with the wizard. So let's go ahead and say set up with wizard. blah, blah, blah. Thank you for purchasing our product. Hit next. All right, so it's going to ask you what kind of satellite that you're using. All right, so we're going to want to go to Spectrum. Next. And then it's going to show you, like, this is how you connect everything, and this is how you bind. So ours are DSMX, right? So in the elevator pitch aileron, we will put our bind plug. Never run power to the elevator pitch aileron. You will burn the unit up. They warn you about that multiple times. And they actually, yeah, right there. Never plug power supply into the sys port. So never plug it in up here where we have the USB that goes to the computer, right? And never plug it into the elevator pitch aileron, because it will also potentially fry the device. So just a heads up, guys. So this is your basic order. I'll show you on the Spirit unit itself. So we hit next. And now it's going to say, how do you have your device set up? I like to always have the wiring facing towards the back of the helicopter, which would be 0 degrees. And we're setting up a Goblin, which is channel 132, just like this. And then I'm actually going to select, because this will do a bunch of basic settings. Goblin 700, next. Now it's going to ask us what our servos are for cyclic and rudder. I like to go ahead and just set to 15, 20, and 333. That way you don't have any crazy burnouts if you don't know what your servos can do. These servos can actually do 960, but I'm not going to mess with it. It really doesn't matter. They can do frequency of 333. And then again, this is just telling you what ones go where. So we'll hit next. Now, this is about binding. Alright guys, so I had screwed up and I never actually disconnected, which is actually fine. So now that I disconnected, then it showed the instructions for binding. Okay, what I just showed you. This is where we go ahead and do the bind process, okay? So, we'll actually power the device off. It's okay to do at this part of the setup. And then we will take our bind plug right here, and we will plug it into the elevator pitch aileron, right? And then we'll plug the BEC back in again. And now you can, we plugged in the BEC again, and now you can immediately see that your DSM satellite receivers are blinking really fast. So now we will come into the radio. And again, if you're not on this screen, here's the main screen. You just tap model once. It'll bring you here. And again, this is a profile that's already built, so we're already set up for this. Literally all that we're going to do is click bind. And then boom, you see the satellite receivers stop flashing. And it's going to do one at a time. It's going to do this one first. Boom. And then it's going to do that one. Boom. And now they're both continually, the lights are continually on, which means that it bound to both satellite receivers. Perfect. Now we can actually power the device off. So we just literally unplug, we pull the bind plug out, right? And now we power the device back on. And now our receivers are bound, and they're just constantly lit up because it's connected to our radio now. And so now that we're at this part in the software, we're going to go ahead and click connect. And it's going to reconnect our Spirit device. Now we can hit next. Now we can see all of our control surfaces, right? So on the radio, when we move the sticks around, we can see what's doing what here. And so we have throttle, right? I'm sorry, that's pitch. So our throttle hold is on, which means that it's not allowing there to be any throttle when we give it throttle, but now there will be. So we armed it. And I forgot this profile is actually turned way down for a low head speed.
Engine off.
We got rudder, left and right. We got pitch up and pitch down. And if we do idle up,
Flight mode 1.
right? Now we have pitch up, and then we have center stick, and then we have negative pitch.
Flight mode normal.
And then we have our elevator, so we'll push the elevator forward and backward. We got elevator, we got aileron, left and right. And then gyro is actually on this knob right here. You can see. Now the way that I have my profile set up is what actually gets messed with the spring switch, with the rescue, okay, is the gyro. So you can see that it'll go from headlock to normal. When it goes to normal, later on in the setup, we'll actually set it so that normal enables rescue. So we can go ahead and hit next here, guys. Now, this kind of stuff we're not going to know until we get the helicopter completely built. We don't know which servos are going to need reversed and put which way, right? We don't know which way the collective direction is going to go. It should not need reverse, but I've seen it before. We hit next again. Again, this stuff we can't do our subtrims right now, but I am going to set everything to 0 or close to the center. Right, because we want to use as little trim as possible. So next, this screen is your geometry, which we can't actually mess with until we have the helicopter fully built. Next, servo limits. So your pitch, how much pitch you're actually going to have overall. That's what this is. So if you mechanically set your helicopter to have 13 degrees, let's say the slider is in the center, right? If you set your helicopter to have 13 degrees of pitch positive and then 13 degrees of pitch negative on the blades, right? Then you're set. Like the maximum is 13 here and the maximum is 13 here. But if you come in here and you turn this slider up, it will automatically increase on both sides. So once you get your blades adjusted correctly, 13 this way, 13 this way, so it's even, when you adjust this slider, you could put it to 14 and 14 without having to mechanically adjust your blades. So that's what that does for you. And then your cyclic ring. So cyclic ring tuning is on your swash, right? When you're like this, how far can you dip, right? How much do you want this thing to be able to angle? So when the cyclic ring is only in the middle, you're about like this, right? When the cyclic ring is turned all the way up, you get full tilt. And we'll actually demonstrate that once we get this all built. I like to turn my cyclic ring up pretty fucking high. Rudder endpoints, that's pretty self-explanatory, and we will show that once we get the heli built. So next, and then it says congratulations, you're completely done. So the setup is actually pretty easy. And then I'm going to do a second video of once you get it mounted on the helicopter, what do you do? The only other thing that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to say finish, and it automatically saved. But I also want to show you when you make any changes in the software and you come to update, backup, you go to unit and say save, and that saves it to the unit. If you make changes and you don't do that, they will not save. So we're actually going to come into Stabby, because I am going to set, remember how that gyro said normal? I'm going to set stabilization normal. So here you can also see your rescue tab. So I'm going to set that to normal, and then I'm going to go back to backup, right? I'm going to say save, and that's going to save to the unit. And now you'll actually see when we're under diagnostics, stabilization engaged, and then not. And you'll see it goes, and it changes the gyro with this spring switch. The reason that I like that is because as soon as you let off of it, it's done. So I do it a little bit different than rescue. I use the auto leveling. So basically, if you just were to hold this switch at all times, all it's going to do is keep your heli level, and it's going to have bank limits. Right? Now, I do actually have that set to a switch, so that we can turn it on and leave it on all the time, auto leveling. But it's also set for stabilization normal, which means your heli is upright. So no matter where you're at, if you pull this spring switch, it's going to bring you flat and upright. Okay? But, let me see which one it is here. There it is. So, what is this? SG. So we have our spring switch is the bailout, right? SG, when you flip it forward, also engages the gyro to make it do auto leveling. So when you pull SG all the way forward and just leave it, now you can just sit here and fly your heli around in full stabilization auto leveling mode. And it has bank limits, right? So you can't turn more than a certain amount, and you can't go inverted. So if you ever are just a beginner, I'm going to recommend that you always fly in full stabilization mode. Because anytime you're pulling on the stick and you let off, normally if you turn right, however much that you turn, and then you let off the stick, it's going to stay right there, and it's going to keep going that way. Now when you let off the stick, it's just going to level you out. So any time that you make a movement and then let off the stick, it's going to level you out. So you have to hold the movement at all times for it not to take over. So that's how the stabilization works on these Spirit devices. And if you use my profile, so if you hit me up and say, "No, Miss RC, I need the profile for my TX16. This profile is set up this way. So that if the SG switch is all the way forward, you are always in beginner mode, stabilized. You can never flip the helicopter, and it will always stay perfectly level. Once you get advanced, you can just use it for bailout. And then myself, honestly, I haven't used this in a very long time, which is nice. You know, eventually you take off your training gears on this one, and then you just have an emergency, and eventually you stop using the emergency, and you've learned how to fly finally. So that's the beauty of these Spirit devices, is they will teach you, they will allow you to have some help, and then you can minus that help a little bit at a time until you don't need it anymore at all. So that's it, guys. That's full programming for a Spirit device. That's all the way from binding all the way up. And then, like I said, the second video will actually be on when we mount everything on the helicopter. And then we'll go from there. One thing that I'm going to do real quick, though, is I'm going to power all this down. I'm going to plug all the servos in, power it on, now that we have the subtrims of the servos set at 0. And then that will set all of our servos at dead center. So let's do that real quick. All right, we got all of our servos plugged in. And now we got power back on the BEC. And our servos have power again. Let's go ahead and click reconnect on the software. So we can actually see that on the cyclic, the top one, the third one down, and then the bottom one are moving when we mess with the cyclic servo, or when we mess with the cyclic stick. And then here's our rudder. We can see that that one's moving as well. And so now we know that these are centered, right? And that's all that we wanted to do. Just plug them in, turn it on, make sure that they're centered, and then we can shut it all off. That way when you install it in the helicopter, you can put the horns on at a perfect right angle right away. Never, absolutely never put your servo horns on before you've centered a servo according to the Flybarless controller software. You have no idea what somebody had this set to. Actually, when you move it around, you can hear it auto-adjusting your flight. You absolutely never want to put your servo horns on before you've initialized the flight controller for the first time. you need to go into the software and make sure that they haven't set anything. And you saw, even this at default from the factory, it had these sliders were out of whack. I don't know why, whatever. But if you buy the unit used, it will also be the same case. So the reason I tell you not to do this is because if you plug all your servos in, you put your horns on, and then you initialize your flight controller for the first time, sometimes your servos will be set incorrectly and they'll jam to full lock and they'll go and you'll rush to disconnect the battery, and by the time you disconnect it, you could have burnt a servo out, maybe multiples. So really bear that in mind. Do not hook up your servos and with the horns on for the very first time. Alright guys, the next video will be the full build as always.